All right, welcome everyone again. Welcome to today's webinar. So the topic for today is going to be on Canvas outcomes and the Learning Mastery Gradebook. So if you aren't familiar with it, it is a feature that is available within the Canvas ecosystem. Today it is going to be Paul, who is our Senior CSM from the Priority Services team, who is going to be presenting on this. Just a couple of housekeeping things. So if you do have a question, we ask you to kind of use a Q&A section so that we don't miss it. Sometimes the chat can get a little bit busy. So if you post it in the Q&A session, we'll make sure it gets addressed and answered as well. And if you are an admin or one of the heads at your school and you do have some questions about any of the topics that we discussed today, feel free to kind of reach out to your CSM after this or the CSM team to get more information. All right, without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Paul to kind of introduce himself and start the presentation.
Everyone. It's lovely to see everyone on this actually surprisingly not too bad afternoon in Sydney. I think we were expecting it to rain, but currently, touch wood, looks all right. Oh, that's fake wood. There we go. That sounds real. For people who don't know me, I'm a senior customer success manager with Instructure, and I used to teach in vocational education. I did many things before that as well, but I've been with Instructure for just over 7 years, and I'm the proud dad of 3 fantastic kids who are all in high school this year. So it's fun times for me at the moment. But essentially what we're going to cover today is what outcomes are in Canvas and how to actually get them into your Canvas instance. Also some of the account settings and feature options. I noticed in the chat it was mentioned about some of the new feature options and the new look of the interface. We are actually going to look at what that looks like if you turn that feature option on. And also what does it actually look like from the teacher perspective and also the student/observer perspective. We just got a quick slide on that because it's mostly used from the teacher perspective when people turn it on. It's very, very handy to be able to see where things are aligned with your assessments, with the outcomes that you're trying to achieve in your different courses that you're running at your organization. So without further ado, let's dive straight in and discuss what outcomes actually are. So you might have heard them as standards or national curriculum standards or learning targets, objectives, competencies. Under the AQF, you might have heard the term competencies, competent, not yet competent. We'll talk about that as well. Proficiencies, disposition measuring is becoming quite popular with the use of outcomes in Canvas. We've actually seen a number of schools and organizations measure disposition of students using outcomes in Canvas. But what they essentially are is a nice descriptor of what you're expecting your students to achieve. The main thing is they need to be measurable in some way. So when you set up outcomes, you do need to set up a scale and for you to be able to set some sort of measurement for that. Now, I'll be giving a couple of examples of that, but the most common in the K-12 land, you might be seeing the A to E standard in Australia in particular, or some other standard if you're dialing into this meeting from overseas. But essentially that standard is a 5-point scale when you do that sort of conversion. In the vocational education sector, it's very, very common to have competent and not yet competent as that scale. So it's basically a 0 and a 1. 0, you're not yet competent. 1, yes, you are. It's kind of binary. So we'll have a look at that, but it's a way of measuring the progress of the student and the standards or the competencies that they're meeting in their studies. So we're going to launch a poll. Rio's my right-hand man today, so he'll launched a poll there. And if you wouldn't mind answering, what is your experience using outcomes in Canvas? So help us to get a bit of a gauge of where everyone's at. It's shaping up to be very interesting. We've got a lot of people on, so we'll give you a couple of minutes on that. Or not a couple of minutes, maybe 30 seconds. Okay. All right, so Rio's ended the poll there and sharing the results. So it's quite a number who don't have any, probably half, don't have any experience with outcomes. So this is a good place for you to be, but even if you have used outcomes before, there are some new things that have come into Canvas, which hopefully you're going to learn about, and a few tips and tricks that we recommend when you're using outcomes inside of Canvas. All right, so let's have a bit of a chat about how you actually bring the outcomes into your Canvas instance. And there's usually two main methods that you use to bring them in. The first is to create them either in the user interface. So directly in the user interface, you can create the outcomes manually, or you can bring them in via a CSV file in order to bring them into your Canvas instance. Now, I'm going to actually jump in and show you exactly what that looks like. So here I am in a demo sandbox instance, and sorry, please excuse the Star Wars theming. There's a lot of Star Wars happening this month. Kenobi's coming out at the end of the month for people who don't know. And May the 4th was not very long ago. So May the 4th be with you for those who are Star Wars fans. But this is my Empire sub-account in my Canvas instance. And to create them manually, you literally just click on the big button that says create. And then you can put in a description of what this is and what the outcome is. You can create new outcome groups. Let me actually go back one step and show you what that looks like. So you can group together outcomes, and this is very common. So under the Australian curriculum, for example, you'll have your different subject areas, and then you'll have the different years that they're applied to, and then you might have all the different topics, and then the individual outcomes for the individual topics inside of the curriculum. And each of those levels would be a different group. And when I create a new group, so let's just go Australian curriculum, it becomes kind of like a tree. Now, under the old view of outcomes, this was a side scrolling thing. And to be honest, it wasn't a great experience scrolling side to side through the different outcome groups, but now it's more like a folder structure, that tree structure, like you see in your sub accounts inside of Canvas. And then within the Australian curriculum, I can create a group in here. So I might go to senior students. And then in here, I might have English. And then under English, I can put in, well, actually, I would have put it underneath senior students, but anyway, I made a mistake there. That's fine, I can delete it and do it again. This is just for demo purposes. And so you can see I'm creating that tree structure to kind of group them into logical areas or logical groupings to make it easy to find and search through the outcomes that you have in your account, which could be numerous. There could be many, many outcomes that you have loaded into your Canvas instance. Once you've created a group, then you can create an outcome within that group. So when I've selected this group, and then I'm creating an outcome in this group called reading and writing. That's pretty general. I'm sure you're going to have something a bit more specific than that. And then I can add description, student, and read and write good. So I'm sure there'll be some people who get the reference that I just created there. You'll notice, I'm going to talk about this in a second, with this particular outcome, I didn't set any mastery levels or scales because I've actually set this at the account level, which is pretty cool. I'm going to circle back to that, but this is just a basic demo of how you can create the groups and the outcomes inside of Canvas. So the other method that I mentioned was via a CSV file. So I've created a CSV file here with some basic outcomes. These are all kind of fake outcomes, but you can see all the different areas that are involved in creating these outcomes. And it comes from, well, where are we? The documentation here for when you go to upload outcomes. I'll show you how you get to that. I'm just going back to my outcomes screen here. I can see, Jeremy, is there a model CSV file? There isn't currently a model CSV file that you can download directly from that. Rio, would you be able to just check if on the community documentation, if there is? But in any case, you can get to the documentation for the format directly from the import screen here. So let me just show you what I did again. I clicked on import up the top right here, and then you can click on the link underneath for outcome CSV format, and that will open up the documentation for the format. So let me just quickly run you through this, and this is being recorded so you can go back and play and rewind and things like that. But essentially the vendor GUID or GUID, think of it like a SysID for outcomes. So when you have SysIDs for Canvas, it's an ID that you create to be able to reference an individual object inside of Canvas, whether it's a user, a course, an account, things like that. Whereas these GUIDs, the vendor GUID is a reference for your individual outcomes. And just like SysIDs, they need to be unique, globally unique within your Canvas instance. So you can't have duplicate GUIDs. Now, when you create this, in the user interface, you saw we created that group structure, and we can do exactly the same thing in the CSV file. So each line, I've created a group GUID, and I've said that it's a group for the object type. I'll put the course ID, which is the demo course that we're loading the outcomes into, the title of the group, description, all the stuff that I filled in just now on the screen is in there, and then display name. And now you'll notice we've got calculation method, calculation integer. These are blank, and that's because that's only used for when you create the outcomes themselves. Now, parent GUID means if we are creating that folder structure that we were looking at before, this is how you do it. You're saying, well, which group is the parent of the one I'm creating now? So for this one, I've created a group called BSB 3.0, well, Certificate 3 in Business is the name, the title of the group. And its parent is this one here. So I've got an example of multiple outcomes for a group, just as a group name, as a demo. Now, the reason why I've used this example here is because we have a very handy article on the community, which I'll put this in the chat. And Ruth Thornton, who is actually our product manager for the region, she was involved in helping to create this this particular blog post, but this is specific to vocational education. So I've talked about K-12, this is vocational education. Let me just put that in the chat here. There you go. You're welcome. And I'm referencing option 2 and option 3, which utilizes rubrics and using outcomes in rubrics for competency standing and for having multiple outcomes measured in an assessment rubric. So feel free to read that at your leisure. I'm not going to go through that today, but you can see that when I do the parent GUID for the individual outcomes, then I'm referencing the group that it belongs to. So that's how that structure works. The workflow state is active, means we've made these outcomes active. The mastery points for these, because it's zeros and ones, it's that vocational education example. 1 is mastery, and obviously 0 is not mastery yet. And then I've put the ratings themselves. So one, you go highest to lowest when you create these, and just a new column for each new one. So number 1 is satisfactory, 0, not yet satisfactory for these particular outcomes. Now, I'll just circle back 1 second. The calculation method and calculation integer. Now, there are different calculation methods that you can set for measuring the outcomes in your account. There's highest, so the highest score, the decaying average, n number of times, which is, you might say the last 3 times you've used that outcomes is what you're using to calculate the result that you want for that outcome, or the rating for that outcome. If it's decaying average, then you can specify the percentage for the most recent assessment that's assessed against that outcome. The default is 65%. So it has a slightly higher weighting than the weighting of assessments before that latest one. And you can change the percentage to whatever you like. But the reason why I don't have an integer in this for highest is because, well, I'm not specifying a percentage or the last n number of times. I'm literally just doing the highest. Or another option is most recent, but you can see all those options in the documentation here. So the calculation method, decaying average, and mastery, highest, latest. And there's a new one coming for which has been requested quite highly in our region, and that's a straight average. We will get a straight average calculation method in outcomes very soon. So that is kind of exciting.
Hey, Paul, I'm just going to jump in there because we've got a couple of questions, and I think
I was about to say, Rio, do we have any questions that we need?
Yeah. So thanks for asking. So Dave has a question. So he's experienced difficulty in copying outcomes from course to course, and have been advised to create outcomes at the root to avoid such manual rehandling. Is this correct, or is there an easier workflow?
I'm so glad you asked that question, Dave, because yes. Sorry, I'm just going to.
Oh. We're just having some connection issues, I think. Can you guys hear me still, or? Yeah. Okay. I might just jump in and try and answer that question. But yes, my advice is that creating outcomes at the root account level is always going to be the best. Not only for the reason of being able to copy from one course to another, but also for reporting purposes. If you include outcomes at the root account level and include them into your rubrics, it allows you to use an account level report called outcome results, which allows you to kind of get the granular level that you can, from a rubric, for example, where it allows you to kind of show which student and what their outcome, mastery was for that particular criteria. So I think that's probably the advantage of doing it at the root account, as well as the ones that addresses David's kind of issue as well.
Yeah, thanks, Ria. My connection just kind of messed up. My computer was about to die, so I just rescued my computer. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right, perfect. I think, Ria's covered that off. Megan's asked, what's his root account? So right at the very top, if you're not an admin in your Canvas instance, then this concept may be a bit foreign to you, but you can split up your Canvas instance into multiple accounts or sub-accounts. But your organization, the root account is right at the very top, but you might have sub-accounts like different subject areas or different faculties or things like that. Depending on your organization.
Yeah. All right, the next question. Will it still be possible to view outcome alignments in the redesign of the outcome interface? Yes,
there's actually some really exciting stuff happening with that, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later on. So we might circle back to that when I get to that towards the end, actually.
Yeah. This is a couple of questions around people not seeing the new outcome interface. So, Paul, how do they switch it on?
All right. So, You've jumped the gun. It's on the very next slide. All right. So the new one is called Improved Outcomes Management, and a CSM has to enable that. There's some very, very good reasons for that. There's also the account and course level outcomes mastery scales. So let me talk about those before I go any further. Account and course level outcome mastery scales means that you can set the mastery level right at the account or course level for all of the outcomes in that account or course, which is really, really cool. And that's why when I created that outcome in the user interface, you couldn't actually see the rating scales because I'd already had this feature turned on and it was already set for the account. Now, at the moment, it is, if you switch that on, then you can't actually modify individual outcomes to a different mastery scale, but that is coming. And that's one of the things I was going to talk about later on. So there's that, and the improved outcomes management is that new interface that we were looking at there. Now, the reason why a CSM needs to enable the account and course level and improved outcomes management is because once you turn that on, because it modifies all the outcomes in your account, if you have some outcomes that you've already used in your account and you switch that on, then you're going to have a mismatch with the data. Some of it will be the old scale, whatever old scale you use, and any time from that point onwards, it's going to use a new scale. So if you're in the middle of a semester or middle of a course or anything like that, it is not a good idea. You're going to get some very unhappy people if you turn it on at that point in time. So you do need to reach out to your CSM to turn on both of those features because one is dependent on the other. If you, you need to have account and course level outcomes mastery scales and improve outcomes management turned on for that. And you might want to wait until an opportune time to do that. So over the summer holidays or mid-semester, or a point in time where you're not likely going to break any outcomes that you're currently using inside of Canvas.
All right. Have you got time for a couple more questions?
Yeah, go for it.
All right. So Colleen, our long-time listener, many-time caller. We have used outcomes before, but when we copy the course, it brings the outcomes with it, and then we can't change them once the course has begun. Is there some way to edit them once the course has begun?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. We might have to get back to you on how that changes with the new updates to outcomes. We'll follow up with the product team on that because there are some back-end things that are changing with the account and course level and the new individual mastery level outcomes. So that is correct for old outcomes, but we'd have to get back to you as far as the new layout and new features for outcomes.
Yeah. Jay says we'd like to see the reporting side of outcomes as well in today's webinar. So if that could be covered a little bit, we can show you that.
Yep.
And I'm just going to answer that live. Okay, so if outcomes are added to the root account, will students still see all of them in the outcomes report, even the ones that don't apply to their course?
No, students only see the ones that are applied to the assessments that they take. That's all they see. So admins can obviously see everything, and teachers can import stuff from the account level into their course. So you can find outcomes from the account level and use them in your course. They will only see the ones that they've brought into their course. But if they're an administrator, they'll be able to see whatever they can see under their administrator role. So if it's at the root account, then they'll see all of them because it flows down to everyone. But yeah, they won't appear in your course unless you use them, unless you bring them in and add them into your rubrics or import them into your course.
All right. I think that's it for now. I think I've addressed the other ones. So yeah, let's continue with the webinar.
All right. So I mentioned the mastery scales and how you set that. I can show you here in the live version as well. So if I close that down, you can see you can modify the mastery scale. This is the new part of the new interface. And you can change the description, you can change the mastery level, you can change the colors, you can change all of this. You can add extra mastery levels and then save the mastery scale, and that will apply across the whole account or the course if you're doing it at the course level. And then we have the calculation method. So at the moment, I've got highest score as the calculation method, but you can select the other calculation methods here as well. So that's what the new interface looks like currently. All right. Now, the outcomes permissions, when you turn on these new feature options, they're automatically given to the account admin role, but not automatically to other roles in Canvas. So that's just something to be aware of. Once it is enabled, if you need to give those permissions to other roles in your Canvas instance, whether they're custom admin roles or they're teacher roles, then you will need to enable it for those roles once you've turned it on. So just a bit of a pro tip there. All right, Rio, will you please launch the next poll?
Sorry about that. I was just asking some questions. So.
Yeah, I figured.
All right, I've just launched it. Feel free to kind of jump in and start answering. All right, I might hit the end in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, I've just shared that then.
All right, we're pretty much 50-50, which I don't know if I was expecting that. So that's actually really good. I think the way that people have answered this, and jump in the chat if I'm wrong on this front, but you may be using competencies or outcome levels or mastery levels or whatever outside of Canvas currently, and you might have an established method. So a lot of K-12 schools, for example, are definitely using the Australian curriculum or the national curriculum or state curriculum standards in their teaching anyway. So you can bring that across into Canvas and add them in and be using it and do some reporting across your Canvas instance. So that's really, really interesting. Now, if you were, just in the chat, if you were using it in Canvas, what sort of calculation method would you be using for your outcomes? I'm actually really interested to hear what method would be suitable for your organization. The latest, highest score, highest. Would anyone be, I mentioned the average, which is coming. Would anyone be using a straight average in the future? Highest or decaying average? No. Yes. No average. Yes, straight average is useful. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
It's
so, yeah. So I talked about this earlier, and we've seen it now live in action, but this is how it looks like with the new structure, and there's a bit more of a folder structure there on the slide decks for you able to see the improved outcomes management. Again, a CSM must enable that because it does affect things, because it's linked to the account outcomes management. Now, from a teacher view, in a course, a teacher can import outcomes into their own course if they want to. Generally, we don't recommend that. As David mentioned earlier, we do recommend doing it at the root account level, adding the outcomes up there. The reason for that is because the reporting that you can do for outcomes is based on where you've added them. If you've added it in a single course, you can only do reporting out of that one single course. But if you've added it at the root account, then you can do reporting on any of your accounts inside of Canvas. Or if you've added a specific sub-account, then you can do reporting across any course that's used the outcomes in that sub-account. So just be mindful of that. It may be very appropriate to add it, say, just at a sub-account level for certain types of outcomes, depending on what you want to do. So what comes to mind is, say you're a K-12 school, then you may have, just in your junior school, or your primary school, you might have K-6 outcomes just in the junior sub-account, and then you might have 7-12 outcomes in the senior sub-account. So that's an example of where you might separate it, not put it right at the root. But yeah, as high as you can go, it just means you've got broader coverage for any course that might use those outcomes, which makes it much easier for reporting purposes. So Learning Mastery Gradebook. This is what it looks like, and let me show you. I've actually got this open. Where is it? Here, in a bit of a demo course here of what this might look like. And you can go and actually see how students are tracking across your course for the outcomes. And you can see that the course average up the very top there. You can do the course median, which is really handy. And you can get a really quick glance and see which students are doing really well and which students might need a little bit of hand. You can see test student 1 is doing pretty awesome. And test student 5 might need a little bit of help, or even test student 7. They might need a bit of a hand. So you can just get that nice, easy visual as a teacher to see, how everyone's doing. Now, the way that you get to that, let me just go into marks. This is just a demo course, so there's not a lot of data in here. But, well, what am I doing? I'm in the Learning Mastery Gradebook. If I go to the regular gradebook, you can see in the top left, I can switch to the Learning Mastery Gradebook. And that's how you switch between the two screens. And I can go to see all the outcomes. I've got a whole bunch of outcomes I imported into this course, which is why I had to scroll a little bit to see that. Normally, depending on the course that you're doing, you may not have quite so many outcomes in your particular course. Now, people talked about reporting. Let me start at the course level, which hopefully you're not going to use too much, although it could be handy for a teacher to download a report just in their course. You can see that right here on the right, just export report, and you can export that out into a CSV file and bring that into Excel and do any reporting that you like. If I was to do it at the account level, I can go to my account settings and go to reports, and we've got the outcome export report. Now, for anyone who hasn't seen, and the outcome results report, sorry. The outcome results report is probably the one that you want. And this gives you all the results from all the outcomes. So the outcome export report, someone asked earlier, is there a pro forma CSV? You can kind of create one by doing the outcome export report because it is in the right format. You can see we've got vendor GUID, object type, etc. It's all in there in that particular report. So you could use that as your template to create those outcomes if you wanted to do it in a CSV file. So that is where you do the reporting. For any of the reports along here, you can literally just click on the little question mark and it'll show you all of the data that's contained in that report. And you can see in the outcome results report, there's a lot of data in there. You can bring that into Excel and you can filter by the student, by the assessment type, the course ID, section ID, the course name, the assignment URL. There's so many things that you can filter and slice and dice this up into to do any sort of reporting that you want to do. So it's really, really handy. Okay, so students and observers. Now they have a different view. I'm not going to dwell on this view, but they get to see for the for the Learning Mastery, if you've turned on the Learning Mastery Gradebook for students, they can see that. Sorry, we got caught up in some other things on the earlier slide when I talked about the feature options. So it's actually a feature option to turn on the Learning Mastery Gradebook for teachers. That's not on by default. You do have to turn that on. And the reason why it's not on by default is because if you're not using outcomes, then it's something that won't appear and distract your teachers or instructors unnecessarily, if it's something that you're not using. Now, with students and observers, that is a separate feature option. So the Student Learning Mastery Gradebook, if you're not ready to show parents and students their results for their outcomes, then you might want that off as well, because you may want to educate parents, for example, on how you're going to be measuring your students in their assessments. So they're both feature options that you do need to turn on if you do want to use them. And here's just another slide of how it might look like, and you'll have different alignments to the different outcomes in that screen. And just to wrap things up, and kind of related to that, you'll notice, well, I mentioned alignments, I'll just go back one. There are alignments, you can see in the Learning Mastery Gradebook, all the different outcomes there, but it's a little bit difficult to actually see, well, which outcomes align to which assessments and things like that. Because at the moment, you attach the outcome to the assessment via a rubric. Let me just show you that really quickly, actually, whilst we're thinking about it. So I think, which tab do I have it in? I'll just go to assignments, and I'm going to create a new assignment in this course. Actually, I'll open up this assignment and I'll show you how I've done it. So you can see, if I go to edit this assignment, down the very bottom, oh, sorry, let me cancel that. I can go and edit the rubric. I can go and edit this rubric. When you go to create an assignment, you can add a rubric to an assignment. And if you want to add any outcomes, you just need to click on Find Outcome, and then you can find the outcome you're looking for. So you can go across, and this is, I want to add this particular outcome to this assignment. And that's how you add it into an assignment in a rubric. All right, sorry, before I dive into the last bit on what's coming up with outcomes, Rio, is there any questions that I should have a look at?
I'm getting peppered, so I need your help. All right, so Maurice asked, can we discuss the decaying average formula? I'm just wondering whether there's anything in particular you wanted to know. Paul, maybe we can just kind of explain how that formula works.
Yeah, so the decaying average basically gives, well, depending on the percentage that you choose, it basically gives you the opportunity to weight the most recent assessment as the most important. So it's kind of like an average, but giving a higher weight to the most recent assessment. So say, for example, you've got decaying average and you set the percentage at 70%, and you've got two assessments that have been aligned to that particular outcome. It will weight the most recent one with a 70% weighting and the previous one to a 30% weighting. If you had three assessments aligned and you use that exact same thing, then it would be 70% weighting to the most recent assessment and 15% and 15% for the other two assessments. So it basically gives you greater weight, because you would expect over time that students improve. Fingers crossed. So the point of a decaying average is you want to give more weight to what they've done more recently, because theoretically, hopefully they're improving over time. Hopefully that makes sense.
All right, next question. Is there only one mastery scale per sub-account?
Currently, yes. And that's something I'm going to talk about in a second. So, yes. Currently.
All right. Stephen asks, will the new features eventually be able to be turned on by the admin via root account settings rather than the CSM?
Yes. Yeah, so this is just a temporary thing because it's a brand new feature and because it's very high impact. You could have a very lot of sad people if you turn it on mid-semester. That's why it's currently CSM, but in the future, yes. And in the future, it will just be the default. So there will be a point where it will cut over. It's currently something that we need to turn on, but in the future, it'll just be available for anyone to turn on when required.
Yep. All right. Marita asks, is there a way to archive, achieve? Is there a way to archive our outcomes so we can manage our versions? We would like to see the old version and their alignments, but not allow them to be used.
Oh, not currently that I'm aware of. Are you aware of a way of, I don't think you can prevent them from being used.
Yeah, I think they can be on or off, and basically like you can delete them, but not have them available to be shown, but not to be used. So you can't have both.
Yep, not currently. But I mean, you would definitely want to have, and train your staff to use the most recent ones. So just make a very strong point of it when you're releasing new outcomes. Make it very clear when you create your outcome groups that of, say, versioning. So it might be 2022 version, or it might be 2017 or as the old ones. So you could edit those so that's really obvious. You could even change the name of the grouping to make it really obvious that these are old. Put old in caps at the very beginning. And that way it's really obvious for them as to which ones they should be using.
Fiona asks, we have our outcomes at the root account, but then teachers need to add them to their courses to use. I'm assuming this is still correct.
Correct.
Yeah. All right. Megan asks, sorry. If I've created an outcome in the root account, like you suggested, how do I fill this down into all of the individual KLA courses? I might just put in a guide for that. There's 2 guides, aren't there? Yeah, so I'll type that in. So we'll get back to you, Megan. Next question is, can we integrate the outcome with VetTrack? I believe that is not possible, but the best people to ask would be VetTrack directly. They might have kind of come up with a solution that allows you to, but you can obviously still use outcomes and feed them into your rubric and use that as your marking criteria for that particular assessment. And that result obviously gets imported back into VetTrack. So, all right. Next question is, are there plans to add additional view sort filters in the Learning Mastery Gradebook, like with the regular Gradebook? Paul, do you know anything about that?
Not that I'm aware of. That's actually a really good question for the product team. Yeah, let's make a note to follow up on that. I'd be very interested in that.
Yeah. All right. And Claire asks, can the learner student see the outcomes? I think we kind of mentioned this at a higher level than the course, so across all of their courses at once. Okay, so it wasn't quite the same question, but.
Yeah, no, it'll be in the individual courses currently.
Yeah. All right. And can you tell if you have forgotten to meet an outcome?
If you've forgotten to meet an outcome, I suppose from the teacher perspective or the student perspective.
Colleen, maybe if you can just add some additional notes in the chat, we'll try and address that for you, because I think we need a little bit more context.
Yeah, or maybe reach out to the CSM team and we can follow up on that. Yeah,
absolutely. And then, okay, so Dave asks, is there a means to export rubric results without using outcomes? No. Anything to add there, Paul?
No.
That's basically it. The only way that it can be done is by having account level outcomes and then linking it into the rubric. That's why it's such a benefit by having that.
That's why we specifically call that out.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then a couple more. It's been busy. All right. So from the reports, can I drill down to see which specific assignments, rubric ratings / scores are contributing to the summarized outcome score of a student?
Yes, and that's going to get related to what I'm going to talk about in a second. Yes. So you can run that outcome results report, and it's got all the assignments that those outcomes are related to when you run that. But as far as if you don't have any results yet, because I haven't done that, that's leading on to some of the new features that are coming up in outcomes, which I'll talk about in a second.
Yeah. And then lastly, from Colleen, she just clarified that it's from a teacher's perspective, just in relation to that question she asked earlier. And I guess she wants to be able to see whether they've mapped everything.
Oh, if the teacher has mapped the outcomes to all the assignments as the required, I call it the required outcomes. Yeah, there's not currently a clean way. However, that's a nice segue into what I'm going to talk about next. And these are things that are coming up. So we mentioned earlier that the mastery scales are currently at the account level or individual course. And you set that and you can't actually change that for individual outcomes. That is something that's coming quite soon, actually, being able to change it for individual outcomes. So it's not just the account level scale as the default. And what we're talking about just now is that second point there is the outcome alignment summary. So we'll be able to go in and see which items the outcomes are actually aligned to. So at the moment, you have to go to the individual assignments and see, well, have they attached an outcome there? You know, what outcomes have been attached, et cetera, which is a little bit laborious. Whereas the outcome alignment summary, we'll be able to see the outcomes that you have in your account, which ones have actually got things attached to them, what they're attached to, and which ones don't. So you'll be able to see, well, this outcome has been imported into the course, but it's not attached to anything. So you'll be able to see that, which is pretty cool. Yes, I agree, Colleen. Yeah. The new quiz outcome mastery data into Learning Mastery Gradebook. So currently, the outcome mastery data in new quizzes doesn't transfer across into Learning Mastery Gradebook. That's really important to know, but there is an exception to that. So if you attach a rubric to a new quiz, of course, that will flow through because that's just like any other assignment. But the individual outcomes attached to quiz questions doesn't currently flow through, but that is something that the quiz team is working on. And lastly, outcome alignment to non-assessed objects. So this essentially is curriculum mapping. So being able to align outcomes to modules, pages, or assessments is already currently there, discussions, all sorts of things so that you can actually map your curriculum to all of your content and not just to assessment items. So that is really fantastic. So that's some cool stuff that's coming up in the back half of this year, some a little bit earlier. But really, really cool stuff coming along that you want to keep an eye out for. We're going to include that stuff definitely in our newsletter when it does come out and when we have more information. Some of it is very advanced stages, some of it's early stages for being built out. But we're very excited about everything that's on that list there. And it looks like people in the chat are pretty hyped about it as well. But yeah, definitely keep an eye out for our newsletters that we send out via email. And we like to put stuff like that, exciting stuff like that in there. And of course, we put in the registration for these webinars and other cool stuff in there as well. All right. Oh, Rachel, I knew you were going to ask that question. That's something, is there a chance of removing the term mastery? Progress or feedback. That would be pretty cool. the struggle is changing the wording on anything in Canvas affects everyone. For something like that, it affects everything across the board. Yes, but that is something that I'm sure Ruth will definitely watch the recording of this and get that feedback, and we'll pass that feedback on to her as well. All right, any other questions before we finish up, Rio?
I don't think so. I'm just having a look through the chat as well. I believe Darren's going to be hosting a Zoom session just to kind of give information about what they're doing with outcomes and badging solutions. So feel free to kind of jump on to that. I think. All right, so Jeremy just asked, still unclear on how to turn on the new view of outcomes if I have admin status. So just to kind of go back to that question, it's at the moment, you need to reach out to a CSM because it is quite impactful if you do switch it on without knowing the impact of it. And we kind of recommend that you essentially target a time where it's like a new year or new academic year, so that you can kind of time it into building all your courses, etc. Anything you want to add to that, Paul?
No, I just want to reiterate that. So yeah, at the moment, you need to reach out to us and we'll switch it on for you. But you have to be very careful as to the timing of that. I wouldn't do it personally right now, unless you're not using outcomes. If you're not really using outcomes yet, then yeah, flick it on straight away. That's fine. But if you're already currently using outcomes, then I would wait either till between semesters or end of year. Any time where you're not going to impact current courses that are running that might be using outcomes.
Yeah. Sorry, I've just, John, if you could send through an email so that we don't, we've got a few requests to kind of switch this on. So if you could send that through to us as an email, that'll make sure that we kind of don't miss it. Ben?
So Claire, I really like your question. This is actually why we recommend doing outcomes at the account level, because you can track the outcomes across courses. And if you use the same outcome in multiple courses, you can track it across multiple courses. And you can run those account level reports and see the progress track it across multiple, not just courses, multiple assignments across your entire account. So very, very important. That's why it's pretty rare for it to be a good idea to create them just in a specific course. The higher you can create it in the account level, then the better.
Yeah. Sorry, are you going to add something?
Yeah. I just saw a follow-up question. So yeah, the student sees the progress just within each individual course. They don't see it across courses currently. That's more of an admin function. Yeah.
So Ben asks outcomes and new quizzes. So I think it was just around new quizzes done. Okay, so I'll try and kind of rephrase that. So in new quizzes is, I guess, the outcome's going to feed back into the learning mastery gradebook. And I think this is on the slide deck that Paul is showing at the moment. And yes, it is on the roadmap so that it will, like individual questions, if you, I guess, align an outcome to a particular question, it'll feed back into the learning mastery gradebook. Does that answer your question, Ben? Yep. Yeah, okay. Awesome.
All right. Is there anything else? Are we ready to wrap up? We're just about out of time.
Do we address Carl's question? Just, are there any plans to add view sort filters? I think you...
Yeah, we were going to follow up with product on that. Now, I mean, yeah, my guess, if that's going to happen, well, actually, I'm not going to speculate. But you know, the outcome alignment summary would be a great place to put that, in my opinion. But yeah, that's something that I'm not sure if that's specifically what product has in mind currently. We'd have to follow up on that.
Yeah. All right. I think this draws us to the end of the presentation and the webinar. But we'd like to thank everyone that joined today. The recording will be available on the community, as I mentioned in the chat. We recommend that you bookmark that page, because that's where all of our webinars go, you know, the ones that we've done in the past as well. So thank you again for joining, and we look forward to kind of hearing from you. Email us if you want the new feature turned on, even if it's in the test environment or the beta environment, we can get that done for you. All right, thanks again.
Thanks, everyone.